echo on your end?
See, I wonder if this changes anything. Does it?
It might.
Mm, I'm not entirely sure how to fix that. Maybe if no, I don't think so.
Let's just keep going for now.
Sure.
All right. So, few general announcements. One, Trump's out, which
Yep.
is a good
Man.
start, but we're not done yet.
Mm-mm.
Be sure to support the Georgia Senate elections because that'll make it a lot easier. You don't want to
It
deal with
definitely will.
McConnell for the next 2 years.
This turned out to be a pretty crucial year as far as elections are involved. I didn't think that there would be as big hullabaloo over over people's votes, over the ballots as there has been. But what else can you expect from this year?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
This is our last Watchmen episode for a little bit. So, next series, The Power of Love, about Robert Zemeckis, starting with this one. I want to hold your hand. So, look forward to that episode.
I'll definitely be tuning in for it.
Cool. All right, so let's jump into the episodes.
Yes, sir. Let's get into it. This last batch was something pretty crazy. You know, for me to have been watching it the first time around, it answered a lot of the questions that I was looking for. So
start with episode 7, where we see Angela in Vietnam, and how I do like how VVN is like a 4th of July holiday over there, and we see how like the impact of the Vietnam War is seen as like heroic on the Americans' end, but a tragedy on the Vietnam end. Same thing with Dr. Manhattan. Like the Americans love him, but the Vietnamese hate him. That was really interesting contrast.
Yeah, it was. I remember hearing about it earlier in the series, but hearing them describe it as the 51st state kind of threw me off again, and I had to reimagine what a newly, I guess we could call it, colonialized place in the name of the United States looks like. And like a lot, like you said, it definitely Americanized it.
Yeah. To the point where James Brown, Living in America, is played.
Man, and I didn't think that they'd. I was curious to see how they were going to do that, and I thought it was interesting how they sort of put a sort of imperialistic touch on America taking Vietnam.
Yeah. Well, of course, in real life, this probably wouldn't happen. It would be like Puerto Rico, you know?
Someplace a bit closer, maybe a bit smaller.
But like, Puerto Rico is technically U.S. territory, but still not annexed. That's still being talked about.
Yeah, that's actually some politics that I actually know nothing about. It's always confused me. Because you always hear in something like in commercials or announcements or something, they'll say, it's an offer valid in all the states, except U.S. territories, and I don't understand why they've got this place like this. It's pretty confusing in the first place, and I don't think it bodes well for people trying to go back and forth.
Yeah, suppression is the only answer.
But it has me curious, I'd say, to see. I mean, in the show, I think it definitely shows how Native Vietnam people, the natives of the country, felt about everything. What with that scene, why we were there in the first, why episode 7 started with that scene in the first place.
Well, the most obvious parallel is just like in the comic book, Hiroshima, because comic book talked about Hiroshima both as a celebration on the American end and just in a more global sense of tragedy. Mm-hmm.
I don't entirely remember too much about him talking about Hiroshima in the comic, ironically enough. But it there's nothing like Watchmen to help put that perspective into account.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of seeing the actual how the film covered the Watchmen's involvement in Vietnam, and I imagine it, leave it up to something like a movie, piece of cinema to to show it like that. And I like how the Watchmen show, in turn, shows the effects of it. Now that we
Yeah.
had the chance to see what it looked like watching the film, seeing the effect. I keep repeating myself.
But I do love to skip ahead for just a second. I do love how in the next episode, John says, "I regret it."
Mm-hmm. There was a on that note, I didn't think that I'd see as human a side of John or Dr. Manhattan as we've seen in these episodes just going forward.
Well, I think it's a great continuation of his arc because in the original story, he relearns his humanity, and this is the logical extension of that because this is where we see what he does with that.
Seeing how the closest thing to God that is in that universe, see how he or it, I suppose, deals with human decision making. I thought that was a really nice touch too.
Mm-hmm. So, this is also where we find out that Angela's Sister Night persona was modeled off a blaxploitation film, which is the exact opposite of her grandfather. Because Will in episode 6, we saw that he had to hide his racial identity. While in this one, she models her entire persona off it. I think that's a really interesting contrast.
And one thing that I thought was really interesting, just to add on to that, is seeing how, I suppose, showing how the motivation, the inspiration behind, who they are, who they want to be, the heroes that they've become, uh, comes from, in one way or another, someone who looks just like them or reminds them of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's both from the Black perspective and from, just the perspective of something like a child with aspirations. Looking at them from those sides, I think it's incredible to see that while their inspirations and reasons are different, the vehicle, the mode of inspiration is still the same.
Oh yeah, because
Mm-hmm.
despite being the first Black superhero, no Black kids would be inspired by Hood and Justice because they wouldn't know. Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Unless they found out, which I was wondering or not whether they were going to make that public throughout the whole series, and
No.
that was a very resounding no. I'd say.
All right. So we see here that Angela's parents are killed by a Vietnamese nationalist, all
Mhm.
because of Dr. Manhattan and like we were talking about America's reputation as colonizers.
Mhm.
And it's cut because of the framing device of Angela in the hospital. It's cut constantly between the Tulsa footage, which I get what they're saying with the whole violence begets violence thing,
Mm.
but at the same time, I think it's a bit much.
Say it again.
I think it's a bit much because I feel like you can call out like nationalism without inherently comparing it to white nationalism.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are examples of it everywhere, here in the present and even in history. I think personally, I'm interested in seeing them make that comparison only because of its relevance, how relevant it is to American uh, society and current events. But it definitely wasn't the only way. I'm sure they could have. I would have been interested in seeing how else they would have been able to portray it in a modern day fashion.
Well, I just feel like the despite being a terrorist and terribly wrong, just the Vietnamese people were wronged by the American government, while
Hmm.
the white people certainly weren't. So to put them in the same basket, I feel is a little dicey.
Yeah, it trying to go the way of uh, comparing stories. I don't think ever really bodes well because somebody's gonna, everybody's suffering is unique, and that applies even to their their identifiers, things like their race or their religion. In many cases, I think the only thing that could be done is to take them for what they are individually. What was done to Vietnamese, both in the show and in real life, I think was harsh. It was brutal.
Mm-hmm. Because I feel like they should have gone more into it if they're going to bring it to the show at all. Because especially in the last episode, Lady True becomes the main villain, and I feel
Mhm.
like her motivations could have been explored more. Because we were talking about how she has similarities with Angela, yet that doesn't go further.
There definitely was a lot of potential to show a lot more about Lady True in the later episodes. And I want to say episode 8, I found myself curious as to like why didn't they, dive into this a little earlier into the series. A lot like you said, there could have been a lot of potential uh, to expand on parallels and even some stark contrasts that is between Lady True and Angela, um,
Mm-hmm.
where they are on the moral compass, um, how their families have impacted those placements. Um, Learning a lot about Lady True's family, her parents, I thought was really interesting as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. At first, I was worried because I thought it would be more like Star Wars ring theory, like everybody has to be connected.
Mm.
But as I thought about it, no, it makes sense.
And I know I put it up into, how well written everything was, how well plotted out everything was, because I remember having so many questions when we first saw Lady True show up on the screen, and you only got so few answers, in that scene, in that moment, and throughout the show, you found yourself curious, more and more as we start to learn things about her. You know, where are all these connections? Where are all these motivations? And I think the show or the story itself, the Watchmen story itself, has a very good habit of not readily giving every detail that we ask for when we ask for it, but when
Yeah.
it's best revealed. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that they didn't. I'm glad that they took their time in
Yeah.
how they revealed things.
Yeah, and just like the comic book, it's a very non-linear story. Just like
Hmm.
Dr. Manhattan said, time is a jewel that you have to look at all sides at once. So it just like the comic book, it begins towards the end and then it shows you more as it goes on.
Hmm. I in looking at how time works, just from uh, Dr. Manhattan's perspective alone, really, I think, tied together that chaotic, non-linear sequence of events,
Hmm.
because it a lot of the times going back and forth across a century of time, it's real easy to get confused, especially if they don't, this is 1988, this is 1945, this is the present. I think hearing Dr. Manhattan or hearing John uh, describe everything, much like how he did in the comic and in the movies, you know, it definitely helps out a lot. It helps
Hmm.
piece together a lot of things, and it gives context to each little frame of time.
Well, I loved how in episode 8, um, because in the original story, it was all from his perspective. Like it just cut like in between all these different time periods from his perspective. But in this one, the main point of view character is Angela in that bar scene and
Hmm.
seeing it from the other person and like how she's constantly asking questions about how it works. I think is I think was really great and like completely like turns its head on the whole dynamic.
I thought it was I liked how it it kind of ties together uh, the explanation of Dr. Manhattan's abilities, and also in a sense, his how did Angela put it? How one of those Zeus things? How
Oh yeah.
he kind of just walks into a bar and picks up a love interest.
Well,
Of course, he knew it all from the beginning, but
well,
you
that's the
know,
thing. Like from his
mm,
perspective, why does he go anywhere? Just like the Crime Busters meeting, why did he go there if he knew it was going to fail? Like,
mm,
it's never explained. How does he know where to go to these places? He just knows through future events.
mm. It had me wonder a lot about his attitude towards his knowledge or his perception of time, how he experiences time. Seeing how he was talking about it, seeing the questions that Angela had for him in that scene, definitely had me pretty curious as to, what is this guy, how does he feel about all this? He's out here nonchalantly describing it to everybody, and it happens. He doesn't even have a "ha, I told you so" kind of attitude about it when it happens. It just seems to happen. So
Well,
it's definitely had me curious.
until this episode, I'd say. Well, there's a little bit of that, like she's like he still doesn't understand how like fights work, how like arguments work. It's like, oh, this has to happen. Watch, it's about to happen. But at
Hmm.
the same time, like he understands humor and imagination and just love more, which I think really shows his emotional growth throughout this whole story.
Yeah, like I said, seeing that human side that I was talking about, I I never expected to hear Dr. Manhattan say something along the lines of, "Oh, I don't know what's gonna happen," until we saw this episode, and you get to see exactly how it is that he might not know what's gonna happen to him in the future.
Yeah, on purpose.
Hmm.
Like he knew his perspective was the only thing keeping him from a real relationship, like or at least like a completely human relationship. So he asked Vite to intentionally muddle with his perspective.
Hmm. And I gotta say, on that, uh, just piggybacking on that note, the relationship between Vite and Dr. Manhattan, as they were meeting up, I definitely thought post Watchmen, it was it's not what I expected. Not what I expected at all.
Yeah, you'd expect them to be enemies, but they greet like old friends despite all
Hmm.
their differences. That was really cool.
Hmm. And I guess it makes sense because while they were at odds with each other at one point, they still do have they still have their original monikers. They still have, to some degree or another, the same fundamental ideals that they had going into the Minutemen. And you can't exactly, after reflecting on it, I'd say you can't entirely be surprised. Because it seems like they've been working together a lot longer than they were ever against each other. It would seem.
And just the dialogue between them is really funny. Like, why do they build their godforsaken bombs? And
Hmm.
only Dr. Manhattan would have the balls to come here in nothing but his birthday suit.
And then he just kind of looks down. I can put something on. I
That was
always
awesome.
thought that Dr. Manhattan's sense of humor was pretty incredible as well. Reminds you of that whole, oh, God must have a sense of humor. It's like that's probably the type of sense of humor that he has, and it is a great sense of humor.
And this episode also explains the whole Europa thing. He
Hmm.
created that because as a kid he promised to make something beautiful.
And that's exactly what he did.
Hmm.
I think in several instances too. I know it didn't exactly lead up to it, but in the first few times that I've seen the machine, what he was building in on Mars, which we come to find out, wasn't even actually him. It was a projection of him making it. I
Hmm.
always thought that that was pretty breathtaking as well. So it goes to show, just exactly what how well he carried that out. I think it was really nice seeing how it unfolded like that.
Because it was a castle, right? He was making on Mars in the projection.
Hmm.
And then later you saw Topher making the castle with the Legos.
Hmm.
So it was foreshadowed like that.
And seeing that, ironically enough, you never would have made that bridge. Seeing that, someone like Topher, how we were talking about him before, his attitude, seeing that he was covertly raised by Dr. Manhattan, I think is pretty outstanding.
Yeah,
Um,
and I
it
love
it hmm?
I love how they notice, like, love how the kids scream. There's a blue guy standing on our pool. Topher
Hmm.
says, "It looks like Cal." Angela says, "Because it
It
is."
is. And they were trying to hide it from them for so long, and when he's out there on the pool like that, you have no choice but to go ahead and break it to him. I thought it was interesting that these kids are so often being placed in a scene of action like that
Yeah.
that they have no choice but to just roll with it.
Well,
And
they
I think
still know.
Topher. Hmm?
They still know. Like in the last
Hmm.
episode, like were they taken into Sister Knight's like den, like lair, like Topher's just looking at her uniform with this look of confusion and concern, you know?
Hmm. And I was pretty curious to see. I figured as much that they weren't going to get too much further into that, leaving the reveal up to that and just finalizing the episode. It was that I feel like that's how any last episode should be. But man, it leaves you aching to want to learn more about it, to see more about it. So,
Well, that's the thing. I think she's done
hmm.
because she. The last time you see her in costume is episode 4, and
Is it really?
yeah,
Huh.
yeah, and then at the very end, there's that whole monologue that Will gives about how wounds need time to heal, and
Hmm.
people wear masks specifically because they're hurt, and so that I feel like that like wraps it all up for her. She realizes, no, it's time to quit this. So really, it's whatever the opposite of an origin story is, because the series begins with her doing her thing, and like as it goes on, she realizes she has to stop.
So maybe something like an exodus for Sister Night then.
Yeah.
That definitely sounds that'd be fitting. And it leads you into wondering a lot like how I'm supposing uh Will, when he was Hooded Justice, when he was at the peak of being Hooded Justice at the Minutemen, you know, how exactly does a superhero feel about giving up the cape? How what are their attitudes about it? And I feel maybe a bit like Batman and DC, they're gonna be compelled to at some point take it back up again. Just out of some sort of conviction or passion, perhaps. It leaves me curious into wondering if Sister Knight is going to make a return in the way that Hooded Justice did at the end of episode 1, hanging the sheriff and everything.
Well, that was his revenge. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. I guess I find myself curious to see if anything like that would be in Sister Knight's future.
Hmm.
Maybe that's just the superhero fan in me geeking out about possible alternatives, but I can't help but wonder.
Well, the show does provide one, just
Mm.
like at the end of the original comic book, Seymour. It's left up to interpretation if he publishes Rorschach's journal. At the end of this at the end of this show, it's left up to interpretation if
Mhm.
what he does with Dr. Manhattan's powers.
Yeah, at the end of the final episode, it oh man, I huh, it's a tease. It's a huge tease, and a lot of the times we want to be shown things, right there on the screen. We want the concrete confirmation, as to whether or not it happened. And it's like you said, it's left a lot for us to it's left for us to guess. It's left for us to look, pour back over the series, and just make an educated guess.
Oh, it's always going to be left up to interpretation. Even if they do another season, there'll be something else, some other cliffhanger, Like
Hmm.
it's just a stylistic choice.
And what a style it is, honestly. I love how, it's one of the things that kept me so hooked into the series was the fact that, and I know I was kind of complaining about it just earlier, but the fact that it brought up so many questions, and
Mhm.
just continually, you know, it would distract from it and then it would return to it, any sort of wondering that you have on your mind as soon as the scene reappears, you know, it it gives you bit by bit.
Well, Damon Lindelof's been doing this his whole career. Back in the 2000s, the main thing, like one of the main complaints or like talking points people had about television was, man, what's going to happen on Lost? That was his
Hmm.
first show.
I suppose that's just an aspect of good. Of I mean, like there's no supposing to it. It's an aspect of good storytelling, especially
Mhm.
when you put it into the form of a series. Um, it reminds me a lot of, in a sense, I suppose the plot building behind Breaking Bad, the AMC show.
Mhm.
Um, I'm a big fan of that show, and seeing how so many times you'd be left wondering. I guess more in a different side, different take of crime and action. What's going to happen to Walter White when he's in this kind of pinch? Is he ever going to make it past this? Are things going to pan out okay? And a lot of the times, the series, a good show, will seem to make you think, no, things won't be all right, but there's hope that it might be better. And seeing how it all unfolds with the individual characters in that story. So I think Watchmen did pretty well. I think they delivered extremely well on that.
All right, so to go back, I have a few other scenes I want to cover. Well, the framing device of episode 7 is Angela in this hospital bed. She
Mm.
because like extracting all of the nostalgia memories from her, and she thinks she's tied up to her grandfather, but
Hmm.
it's actually an elephant.
Man, and for a split second, I was, with all the left wall stuff that I've seen, in the moment that I've seen it, I remember having just, wild ideas of, is it actually aliens? What's going on? And I when I saw that scene, for some reason my head was just telling me, that's it, her grandfather's an elephant. And it
Ooh,
just but sure enough, that it didn't pan out that way. So
I mean,
thank goodness.
it just goes into the old saying, an elephant never forgets.
Hmm.
That's the only reason behind it. It's just really funny way to put it.
Yeah. And also, I was thinking that when they first revealed the elephant and when it showed how much of the room it filled, the elephant filled, it also kind of made me wonder, you know, if it was teasing the sort of elephant in the room saying as well. But I,
Ooh, yeah, that too.
hmm but I feel personally that just the way that just the way that everybody kind of approaches things in that show, all the characters, there was nobody that was going to leave an elephant in the room. I feel like everybody kind of, at some point or another started to address it, especially after that scene. So there was a lot more revealing. There was a lot more. There was more revealing in these episodes after than I think was Well, I don't want to say it was more. There were more reveals in it than the earlier episodes, but I think those reveals were a bit stronger, a bit more cathartic than some of the ones that we saw in the earlier episodes.
Well,
So
yeah,
maybe it was just something. Maybe it was just the story makers telling us, now it's time for us to address it.
yeah. I feel like the first like 6 episodes were all like atmosphere driven, while these
Mhm.
last few were just like wrapping up the story.
Yeah.
And to go to the fight scene where he stages at like Kangaroo Court,
Mm.
that
You
was
said
really
say it again.
that fight scene where he stages that court. There's a
Hmm.
whole year on Europa where he just sits in trial, like
Man,
just manifesting his own guilt. If he has it, I'm not sure.
I was pretty curious to see what that was all about when it was happening. I wasn't entirely sure. I thought it was interesting that prior to finding out exactly how that manor ended up there and how all of his servants, all the clones, ended up there as well. I thought it was interesting to that he basically had designed court for himself.
Mm-hmm.
It takes, I imagine, a certain level of introspection as well as being by yourself, or at least among very limited company, for you to have thought up something along the idea of rule making. So
Mm-hmm.
much so that even if you do break these rules, you send yourself to court by way of design. I was curious to see what the end result was, and uh, the clones, I think, actually showed a pretty human side, a very a bit of an angry mob side
Yeah.
during that whole court scene. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was interesting.
Yeah. It reminded me a lot of The Graduate, the way like they zoom into the mouth saying guilty,
Hmm.
know? And it's just so interesting because Vi told them to say all this stuff about 11-2 and how he killed 3 million people, how he's the worst person in the world.
Hmm.
Yet Vite's never going to admit it because when it's his turn to speak, he farts.
Yeah, and that's it. He sits down and the defense rests, and that's one hell of a rest. um, that's one interesting defense that he had too, and especially if they'd been basically in court for a whole year straight, you'd
Hmm.
have thought that he'd have some sort of, you know, even if it was just a single word, a single phrase, you would have thought that it would have been something else. No, he kind of just old man's it.
Yeah, it shows he's not guilty. Yet
Mhm.
he must be if he sends himself to court in jail on purpose. So I don't know.
And a lot of this time, even in seeing how they imprisoned him after that court, seeing him after that, when he was in prison, it had me wonder a lot as to whether, and a lot of it you can guess by his facial expressions when he's by himself, how much at conflict, how largely at conflict he is with himself over what he's done,
Yeah.
or whether or not he's just, doesn't make no kinds of has no kind of quarrels about it. It seems like he's kind of teetering on the edge of sociopathy, and empathy, sorrow through empathy. And I think that's a very interesting balance. It can't lead you to calling him, completely a villain or completely a hero, because the entire time around he's thinking, I'd like to imagine that he's justified in all the punishment and glory that he subjects himself to almost simultaneously.
Yeah, yeah. Great scene. And going to Beyond, we see that she's a clone
Hmm.
and also Lady True's mother.
That
Because
was I had I think we maybe even had talked about it in an earlier episode, but I know I was pretty curious as to whether or not uh, Beyond was a clone in the first place, just from seeing how uh, I want to say how compliant she's been with Lady True. Um, it kind of it implies a bit of a clone like behavior. At least from what you see in other sci-fi pieces.
right.
And you would always think maybe she was just raised a very very unique way. She is Lady True's. We would think that she was Lady True's daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and that wasn't the case at all. She turned out, like you said, to be a clone of Lady True's mother, and that definitely twisted things up a lot. So.
Yeah, and I like I was saying earlier about clones, how there's this inherent cruelty, how we've seen all these other clones, either on Europa or on Earth, just they can be destroyed at a moment's notice. It's just really
Mhm.
interesting how the last one we see, Beyond, is the only one that's treated like a real person.
Yeah, and ironically enough, I guess it's all left to be interpreted by the creators of these clones and what their intentions were.
Suppose.
You see a lot that Dr. Manhattan and Vite treated these clones, made and treated these clones a bit like, like how the show kind of implied from the creationism standpoint, a lot like how God created Adam and Eve, compared to Lady True cloning her mother in a sense, and just, I suppose, subjecting her to privacy. I think Beyond had that level of privacy that the other clones didn't. And while the clones had a bit of a purpose to, serve, glorify whoever it was that was in the manor, their creator or Vite, uh, for Beyond, it was more just to assist Lady True a bit as a confidant, a bit as a family member, in a number of different ways. And it kind of gave her a higher set of privileges, I'd
Mm-hmm.
say, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it translates into a pretty eerie way of how you treat family. Had I had, the foresight or mind, to do something like clone my mother, she turns out to be something like a child to me, it provokes a lot of questions. How exactly would you treat your mother daughter? It's especially if they're made of uh, if they're cloned, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Right. So yeah, then we get to the big reveal. Without knowing it, Cal was John the whole time.
Hmm.
That's my favorite scene of this whole season because it blew my mind the first time, and it breaks me down into tears every other time I've seen it. Because just the way she has to smack his skull, and
Hmm.
then the blue light comes out with the cover of Life on Mars. It breaks me down.
I I wasn't expecting it until Lady True had pointed it out to Angela when they were speaking, and it's just like, yeah, I said he's in Tulsa, and you didn't even ask who it was, and it had me thinking. It's just like that is kind of strange that she, just sort of walked off, not even wanting to know who, how Dr. Manhattan is in Tulsa. And I don't want to say that I figured it out at that point, but my mind was already starting to roam. It's like it's got to be someone she's trying to protect. And it didn't come to me that it would be Cal, until he had the whole, what's going on. I don't, that bit of a lost reaction to her resolving to get Dr. Manhattan back. And it's like that makes a lot of sense. I suppose it did. And when I saw that reveal, for me, I was pretty astounded. I was blown away myself. Um, I never really would have imagined uh, having someone like Dr. Manhattan in front of our faces, the viewers' faces, the whole time around either. Especially now without him, glowing blue or anything or some sort of hit. They had kept it hidden all this time. And it's only because he had a bit something like amnesia, it, which in a way was, I suppose, something like amnesia for Dr. Manhattan. How we were saying that just earlier, he wasn't able to figure anything out about his future. Excuse me. Um, I didn't think that was gonna. I didn't think it was gonna turn out that way.
And it's foreshadowed pretty cleverly in the previous episodes because during the Christmas scene, Cal's eager to open the presents, and she says, "I'm training you to like surprises."
Hmm.
And episode 3 or 4, we see that there's that whole "heavens just pretend" monologue that he gives. That's very Manhattan-y.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all those scenes that we see Lori's clearly very attracted to Cal, doesn't know why.
Hmm. I did sense that a bit myself. I never actually picked up on it or even bothered to wonder why. It kind of that definitely slid underneath the surface for me. I didn't even pick up on that. Um, but on that note, seeing how Lori's reaction to Dr. Manhattan being within her area, within her vicinity, her learning that he's in Tulsa and everything, I thought was another really interesting development. Because it shows that she's had a weak spot for him all this time, even throughout the
Mhm.
series.
Yeah.
But you don't really imagine how, especially somebody as hardened and as experienced in things as Laurie was, you never would have imagined how she would have realistically reacted until it actually happened.
Because we saw as she kept on going to those Manhattan booths, even though she knew it was just for show. She
Hmm.
just had to pretend she was talking to him.
And part of me, throughout the series, I was I was rooting for the fact that he was that he was just up there on Mars, in his own kind of omnipresent way, just taking all those messages in, and the fact that Angela's car flew out of the sky after she made that call definitely pokes people in that direction if that's what they wanted to believe.
Right.
I thought it was I don't want to call it coincidence, but I definitely thought it was a very interesting unfolding of events.
Yeah. There's a lot of great moments in the bar scene too, like um your favorite song's about to play now, and
Hmm.
it is her favorite song, just not right now. She's never heard it.
And I thought that was that was pretty funny. I thought too. It's because it basically shows, without us knowing, how it became her favorite song.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess it shows a bit of an anachronism for Dr. Manhattan, maybe like reverse anachronism. You
Mhm.
know, he's thinking and acting a bit too ahead of the present in order for people to follow up. And in this case, when it comes to the love interest that he ended up getting married to, having a family with, that's it's an interesting way to show that. Because a
Mhm.
lot of the times we wouldn't have known that that was her favorite song unless there was some sort of scene where she was describing it to somebody. But no, when you're dealing with Dr. Manhattan, he tells it to you like it is. So,
Mhm.
you know,
And we also get the scene where this is the first time where he ever actually interferes with an event. Like in the comic book, he never wanted to
mm,
because he knew the implications were too great. He just didn't want to. But in this time he's told to meet with Will, and in doing so, he slips that Judd Crawford is a Klansman, and that triggers the whole sequence of events. So it's like
hmm
nobody knew. Like technically, there was no moment where somebody found out that he was in the closet. It was just a time paradox that triggered this whole thing.
hmm and I know that can lead people to getting everything confused, getting just hurting their heads, trying to figure that out because it's one of those things that's it's a consequence, I think, of messing with time, trying to manipulate time, even through uh, some way like speaking to Dr. Manhattan,
Hmm.
uh, because I think at that moment when Angela was talking to him at the pool, she kind of realized that she has some sort of effect. It's like, oh, well, you're talking to him at the same time you're talking to me. That's how time is working for you. And after she got a hold of that, she, in a sense, yeah, basically killed Judd with that.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I thought it was me being the Dragon Ball Z fan that I am. It reminded me of future Trunks coming in telling everybody about the androids and how that shifted everything and not in the way that he expected. Um, for everything basically to turn out the way that it is. It kind of makes you wonder. It brings you back to that question of whether everything is predestined or not. You think you have an active hand in changing it, but that actually in turn just becomes the exact reason that it happens.
Yeah, and one thing I want to bring up is that there's this obscure 1977 blaxploitation superhero movie called A Bar, the first Black Superman,
Hmm.
which must have been why they named um, Angela and Cal A Bar, because they knew they would do this whole twist with them. Because we know that Dr. Manhattan's the first Superman, and
Hmm.
because he's blue, there's no reason why you can't have him be played by a black actor like they do here. Like nobody
Hmm.
saw it coming, but in the story, it makes sense. So
It
that's
does, and I was honestly really happy to see that too, because I
yeah.
found myself when I first started getting into Watchmen lore, I was um I was pretty curious as to whether or not it's like I was comparing Dr. Manhattan a lot to the idea of, this air of ability that sometimes people uh, that they attribute to being black, and it made me wonder a lot. What if Dr. Manhattan was black? What would he have changed his demeanor? Would his outlook have been any different? Was it an entirely superhuman mentality that he's had the entire time, or I was pretty curious as to how a different body would possibly make a different Dr. Manhattan. And in this case, watching the show, it kind of answered that in the way of, it feels almost like something like reincarnation.
Yeah.
Him taking on a different body and just making it that. Um, I thought it was really interesting to
Hmm.
see that reincarnated body take new form, I guess new blue form, because it's not the same actor from the film,
No.
and you know it's still the same character regardless. And
Hmm.
it turned out to be beautiful, I'd say,
Yeah.
at the end of everything.
Um, at school, I have a friend who, um, she hadn't seen the show, and well, she's black. And when I told her that they have a black actor playing Dr. Manhattan, her
Mhm.
reaction was worth $1 million. It was awesome.
Yeah, I'm sure it was probably a bit closer to how I felt when I was watching it unfold myself. It's beautiful to watch. It is beautiful to watch, and I didn't want to try and get too uppity about it, but yeah, I would have had a very similar reaction had somebody told me that Dr. Manhattan is one of my favorite comic book characters in the first place, and to find out that he, basically came back to life, came back to the human world, human society as a black man. Oh, incredible, incredible! And then in a society like post Squid Watchmen's universe, to see that when something like the cavalry is that much more pronounced a not so good group, an evil group, it ties in a lot of relief, and a lot of joy from seeing him. And what'd you say the actor's name was?
Oh, Yahamadul Mateen the second.
I've seen him in other films and other shows before. I've seen him in Black Mirror, and
Hmm.
I think he did incredibly well in Black Mirror. He plays a lot of roles, I think, that kind of subvert what you would imagine a just a black actor to take up in the first place. Uh, and playing something like an omnipresent, you know, God adjacent type being, I think was really well. It's gonna look pretty good on. It shows how accomplished and how good of an actor he can be because he really sold it, I'd say.
Hmm. And he has a theory about the show. He
Mhm.
thinks that Manhattan also gave his powers to Will, which would explain how he was alive for so long.
Mhm. Well, it could be. Um, I remember watching, as far as how I've started to know the Watchmen universe. I started out with the film, turned back and went to the comics, watched the film again, and in watching the film, I found that oh geez, I lost my train of thought mid sentence. Um, I'm I'm sorry. Remind me of what we were talking about.
Oh, we were just talking about how the theory that Will has Dr. Manhattan's powers. which he does hint at in the second episode. He goes, maybe trapped in Manhattan.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting question at that point too. But yeah, it does. That's reminds me of what I was saying. In the film, it sort of implies, through the way of trying to frame Dr. Manhattan to get him off Earth and everything, that anybody that he comes in touch with kind of, has a steps up in their quality of life. People would want to argue almost for knowing him, however they knew him, with his previous lovers, and I think they even mentioned a coworker of his in the film.
Well, yeah, in the original story, there's a whole conspiracy theory that he's been giving all these people cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out to be not true.
Which, while it isn't true, I feel like it would have been a twisted branch of the truth. A lot according to that theory as well. It would make sense that, somebody or something with that much ability, that much, like I said, God adjacent ability, kind of rubs it off on people. I'd be willing to believe that.
Yeah, okay. I can see that.
Mm-hmm. It's a good theory. It's a good working theory.
Yeah. And it's just a really great love story between John and Angela. Because just like the other relationships, there is trouble with the whole perspective thing. But unlike those, like they work it out, and John grows as a human being through it. It's like I'm glad this show has a heart, because the comic book has a heart that is often a little overlooked. But no, the show definitely has that in spades, especially in this episode.
I just to go back on the relationship, personally, I thought it was, same doctor, different woman. Seeing how it turned out to, how it nearly ended out the same way. It led me to wondering, and I know this is a bit off topic. It led me to wonder exactly, if there would be anybody who, wouldn't make such a big deal over, that being able to see, past, present, and future all at the same time, to be able to experience it all at the same time. If there's anybody that would just hear something like that and go with it, or if it would always end up in an argument, if it would always end up in heartbreak or Dr. Manhattan leaving,
Right. It's just a perspective that's yet to really be understood by human beings.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe it's gonna be something that's beyond the scope of human capability. Maybe not.
Right. So get into the last episode. There's a lot of fight in this one, and it wraps up his whole storyline, and just he finally interacts with planet Earth and everybody for the first time. And there's a lot of really funny scenes there, like when he goes up to the newsstand. Oh my God, Robert Redford is still president.
Mm-hmm. I always love seeing this in films and in shows, cartoons, everything. When the person who's the real deal, someone who, I'm thinking of Avatar in this case, from the last Airbender, and the person who's this real deal, they come up and it's just like, yeah, well, you look like you could be Adrian Veidt, but nah, you got this down wrong.
Yeah.
Or like, you could be the Avatar, but nah, it's not a good costume. And it I found it hilarious to see that, you can have somebody who's so notorious, for killing so many people, for doing outrageous, horrendous things. You would think you'd have studied his face well enough, maybe at some point, to know that he's right there in front of you. Nah, nah, something about his the get up is wrong, or he doesn't quite talk the way that Adrian Veidt would. It's always that air of doubt. And I thought that was funny.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the whole relationship with Lady True, which is really cool
Hmm.
because we see in the opening that Beyond was one of his servants, and as revenge, he took one of his sperm vials and gave herself Vite's daughter.
Hmm. And it makes you want. I was really curious what that was all about as I was watching the scene, but as it was unfolding, I was starting as Lady True made the reveal to Adrian Veidt that she was his daughter. Of course, it all tied in then, and I found myself thinking this is an interesting way of coming into your dad's life and asking for money. you know and it's just like, yeah, it's because I'm the world's smartest woman. It's like, now I need $42 billion. So you kind of, I feel like, had they met, had they worked together under different circumstances, they could have been a pretty powerful team. Maybe even earlier in the series.
But at the
But
same time, he didn't want like a failed son or a failed daughter. Like
mhm.
he gave her nothing on purpose because just like him, he wanted her to make her own name.
Hmm.
So if she hadn't done that, she may have failed.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting too, because you can kind of see a bit of that, like, father daughter pride when they got him back
Mm-hmm.
from Europa
Yeah.
and unthawed him, which in the first place, to be cryogenically frozen with gold is incredible. I think that's just I love it. But when he came to and saw that she had made the tower, and it's like, you really built it. And it's like you could hear a bit. I want to argue a bit of that kind of. It's like, look at my daughter doing evil mad genius superhero stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was pretty incredible to see that quality come out of him.
Mm-hmm. Because he doesn't admit it until the whole Europa thing where he spells out, you see, it was save me daughter.
Hmm. Which
So
goes to show how
back.
many more clones he killed just to spell out daughter, like she pointed out. I thought that was just, I don't know. I don't know. A good enough message pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
But
So then the servants wish him goodbye and they're sad to see him go.
hmm that's another thing that I found myself curious about was how exactly what's going to become of those servants in that manner, especially knowing that it meant so much to Dr. Manhattan. And the only other person besides Dr. Manhattan that was there is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Sure enough, Lady True was able to, fly a spaceship out there, but I wonder realistically if anybody's going to find themselves headed back down there, for whatever reason.
Yeah, who knows? Speaking of Manhattan, because this is when he was captured by the 7th Cavalry and later Lady True kills him. I'm convinced he just went with it. I'm convinced that he could have stopped it if he wanted to, but just went with it on purpose. So it can end. it can all end up with Angela with his powers.
I definitely agree. I definitely think that's and I agree largely because of that one point in that scene where he the Lady True opened up the vault or whatever it was that the dude had walked into, and out came all of his liquid insides, and you know just him all over the floor. And Doctor Manhattan used that to teleport people. It
Yeah,
was Agent Blake, it was Vite, and it was Looking Glass to
yeah.
teleport them to Vite's place.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was it's like, yeah, if you have that kind of ability when you shouldn't have had ability in the first place, it definitely shows that if he wanted to, if he chose to, he could have done something. At least in my mind. So I definitely agree with you there that something, some sort of logic within him kind of just let him go with it, let him play along.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't too sure about that in the last few seconds that we saw of him on screen, because he had the back and forth with Angela. You saw that they were both crying.
Mm-hmm.
I it's hard to make up emotion,
Yeah.
especially when you I guess are like God adjacent, like Dr. Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
It led me to wonder, exactly what was the purpose for doing it.
Well, I
What was the
think.
purpose?
Oh, I'm
Hmm?
sure he was sad to die and leave Angela, but I'm sure he thought it was a greater good because he knew if somebody were to have his powers, it would be much better to have Angela than Lady True or God forbid Cyclops.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. At that point, it's like, man, it kind of reminded me of what would have happened if, uh, say, maybe Barack Obama had the chance to give the presidency to somebody in 2016
Right,
instead of it being over election. That would have been
right,
something interesting to see.
right,
It wasn't Trump or Hillary, it was Michelle.
right.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah. Um, I like how Cyclops fails just through their own incompetence.
Hmm.
Because despite how scary they are throughout most of the series, I like how at the end they remind us, no, there's also just fucking morons. There's no way
Yeah,
we'll figure that out.
man, I know part of me was afraid of the fact that, despite how rowdy and how, just brutal they were, I was really afraid of the fact that they had like some sort of underlying higher intelligence. I thought it was going to be a reveal like that. And oh man, it it turned out not to be the case. I
Thankfully.
feel like they were a bit too slow on
Hmm.
everything, and you know, better off that way.
Hmm.
But I definitely wasn't expecting that when I saw everything that was going on. Part of me was wondering if Lady True, despite all of her planning, was going to be too late. Um, and it turns out she kind of just went and did like a hostile takeover of power, I suppose.
Right.
So, it always comes out to show, like, there are scary sharks out there, scary fish out there, but there are even bigger, scarier sharks and fish out there than them,
Hmm.
as far as the cavalry is concerned.
Hmm. And in that scene, we also find out that Wade is back. He finally comes in after like 4 episodes
Just,
of absence.
yeah, I noticed that he hadn't been on screen in a long time, and it was good
Yeah.
to see him again.
Yeah. And I was worried that he would be indoctrinated into the 7th Cavalry, but no, it was all just for show. He was in a disguise because he wanted to get that video. of Vite's basically confession.
I I definitely have to applaud Looking Glass because I definitely thought that he was a goner too.
Mm-hmm.
I figured he definitely had some sort of willpower, some sort of brain power to overcome things, but
Mm-hmm.
you know when it comes to the idea of brainwashing, how can we tell who's going to be subject to successful brainwashing and who isn't?
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely was afraid that, like I said, he was a goner until it was episode 7, I believe, where we were looking at Abar not Abar Agent Blake's
Yeah,
assistant,
he saw
and
that he
now
killed all those people and
hmm
escaped.
so seeing that definitely left me with a little bit of hope, a
Yeah.
glimmer of hope. And when we next saw Looking Glass on screen again, or I guess Wade without his mask,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it only went to confirm. Yeah, he's still on the right side. He's going undercover.
Mm-hmm.
you know, And I was really glad to see that course take
Mm-hmm.
place.
Yeah, and the last scene with them, I love how after Violet saves the day essentially by raining down the squids again, I
hmm
love how they arrest him both because they can, and also because one, it shows that Wade is finally willing to move on. He's giving up on the whole squid thing and just wants, the world to see the truth, despite his reservations about it at first. It shows that he's willing to accept what he doesn't know.
Man, and that was some growth that I was not expecting to see. And it only makes sense because you could imagine, you can only imagine what kind of what he's been through in the time that he was off screen, what the character was doing off screen.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing how he yeah, a bit like how he kind of just got over it.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels almost like just by meeting and speaking to Vite, he kind of, I guess, solidified that recovery, finalized that recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's some outstanding growth. And I'd like to see, in the real world, people make growth like that as well. But it usually comes in the way of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But I was glad to see it on Wade's part.
Yeah, and I love how Lori, she says, like, when Vi threatens, but the world would end, she says, yeah, people keep saying that, but it never seems to happen. It shows
Yeah.
that even in Watchmen, every doomsday prediction has yet to be accurate. That's an important reminder.
And while it might seem like it to, you know, a certain number of people, it largely isn't the case
Mm-hmm.
because of the actions of maybe a handful of other people. Um, I think it's interesting seeing how it all ties in because, like, in the case of Adrian Veidt, he's one of the people who is so bent on attempting to save the world, or in his case, actually saving the world. But he's also one of the same people to proclaim that the end is nigh. He's said that so many times in these last 3 episodes alone. And that's kind of been the big spooky message that's coming along with the series, the story itself. The end is near, the world is ending, doomsday. And like you said, it just never seems to come to fruition.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have anything else to say about this season? Amazing stuff.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely incredible. I'm very glad that I had the chance to see it. I thank you
Mhm.
a lot, so much for getting giving me the chance to speak with you on it.
Hmm.
Um, I guess I'm just gonna take the standpoint of a fan here. I can't wait for season two if there happens to be a season two.
Yeah.
It's been a pretty good story so far,
Yeah, if
and
there is one, because it's still up in the air.
hmm
I know I know Lindelof doesn't want to do it, but he does want somebody else to take it on. It's just a matter of time of convincing HBO to let that happen.
yeah, man, talking to corporations about things like that, I'm sure they'll probably take their time on deliberating.
Hmm.
But either way, the show as a whole jumps into a lot of aspects of the universe that I'd really hope to see.
Hmm.
Um, Everybody always loves a good enough sequel, a good enough sequel, and this show came out to me, I'd say, as more than a good enough, as an excellent
Yeah.
continuation of the story.
Hmm.
So I'm very glad I got the chance to see it. Um, Very excited to rewatch it again. I'm probably gonna binge it. It's probably actually gonna be one of my favorite TV shows for a while.
Cool.
Uh, just from the matter of the kind of content that it covers and how it covers it, relating to the men of to the universe that the Watchmen are in. So
Hmm.
yeah,
And
I guess that's about it on my end.
real quick, I want to share my pitch for a second season. If I was if I was contacted by HBO to write 9 episodes for Watchmen season 2,
Hmm.
this is where I'd take it. Tulsa PD is abolished. Everybody finds out that they're tied to Cyclops, and both out of distaste for them, and out of nostalgia for the superheroes, as we see with the American Hero Story series and all the stuff like that.
Mm.
The police is abolished in that town, and instead just they bring back vigilantes. And so it'll be like an ideological debate on what is actually better between
Hmm.
the two, like what is the more effective enforcement, and the Vite subplot we pick up in prison with Vite, Robert Redford playing
Hmm.
himself, and Dan Dryberg because he's still there, and so
Yeah,
we would have to see those three interact and try to escape.
that'd be incredible. I'd love to see in that season. I'd love to see Angela and how I'd love to see how Angela would come to be, what kind of role she'd play in that. And
Right.
in that sense, I guess, a lot of the times when it comes to the credits behind something, there's going to be a lot uh, of men, particularly, in some cases, white men who
Yeah.
are the people who are driving this story. A lot of the times it is a multifaceted cast, crew of people who are building these shows, but I'd want to see someone who could better portray the idea of a black woman becoming someone like Dr. Manhattan.
Right.
I'd want to see I'd want to see like a black woman writing it.
Yeah.
you know, just from that standpoint alone, how is that going to look? If there's going to be some more people in the writing booth, I'd want to see, you know,
Yeah.
maybe what is her name? Octavia. Is it Octavia Spencer?
Yeah.
She's a black sci-fi writer. She's a black sci-fi
Oh,
author.
Octavia Butler.
Butler,
Yeah.
Butler. So I'd love to see someone like her write this, just from the sci-fi standpoint, story creating standpoint of, you know, how someone like Angela Abar could incorporate her newfound abilities, her
Right.
alleged
Cool.
newfound abilities.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that'd be my point on it.
Cool. So, yeah, I think that's it. We will
Alrighty.
do we will do another episode on the Rorschach comic books when there's more of them, but I'm really enjoying that series as it's coming out. I look forward to
Mhm.
bringing it up, talking about it again. And
Absolutely.
next time, Power of Love. We're
Right.
starting the Zemeckis retrospective. I'm sure to have some more guests on that. So, see ya.
Alrighty. I'll be sure to tune in for it.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. See ya.
See you later.